Hello sailors, my name's Andy and this is my wife Misty. A few years ago we bought an old neglected sailboat for $3,500 and I've been working on it ever since. I literally learned how to sail on YouTube, but later we both took some lessons. I used to think that sailing was only for rich people. It's not. I used to also think that you had to sail around the world to have fun. You don't. Click subscribe, give it a thumbs up, and join us, and we'll show you how much fun you can have coastal cruising on a cheap sailboat. Welcome to Sailing Soleil. Hello, my name's Andy, and welcome to Sailing Soleil. This is my Catalina 30 sailboat, and today I'm going to try to tackle one of those projects that were in my last video. I'm going to try to tune the rigging on my boat. Now, there's a bunch of different types of sailboat rigging setups, ones that have, one mast, two masts. There's sloops, cutters, schooners, catamarans, yawls, ketch. There's a lot of different kinds of rigging setups. This is a sloop, and a sloop has almost the most simplified version because you just have one mast and one head sail, which is your front sail. So, and my boat is only a 30-foot sailboat, so it's the rigging isn't that complicated on this boat. I've got a forestay in the front, a backstay in the back. I've got a cap shroud, and that's on each side. That's the wire that goes all the way to the top of the mast. And then I have my lower shrouds, which are halfway down the mast, and they go to the deck. So the mast has 3 shrouds on each side, and then the forestay and the backstay. A lot of other sailboats have a lot more complicated rigging. This is pretty simple. I was told by Rick Ross over at Marina Rigging here in Long Beach how to tune my boat, so I'm going to try to do it to what he told me. So know your boat, know your settings, and let's get started. The tools required for this project are the loose gauge, screwdriver, a crescent wrench, a pen, paper, and some blue tape. Okay, so the first thing that you're going to check when you're using this gauge, this is called a lose gauge, or a loose gauge, Loose & Co. And as I mentioned in my last video, this here is a PT, oh, it's a little bright, a PT2. And the PT2 version model has 3/16, 7/32, and 1/4 inch tensions, and the diagram, or the readings for your braking strength. So let's go check it out. Okay, so here's how you use this. And if you could see there, that fits nicely. If I was to go up to the 7/32, it's a little loose in there. So my lower shrouds are 3/16, and my upper shrouds are 1/4 inch. And that shows you right there that bam, that fits nicely, and that fits nicely. So we'll be using the 3/16 and the 1/4 inch for tuning this boat. Okay, the other thing that's nice to have when you're tuning a sailboat is a 100-foot tape. Now, the reason you need a 100-foot tape is what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put the tape on the halyard, and we're gonna go all the way to the top with the tape. And we're basically gonna measure from the top of the rig. We're gonna measure from the top of the rig down to the cap shroud on the port side, and again the cap shroud on the starboard side. And what we're doing is we're measuring the distance of it, and we're seeing if the mast is leaning one way or the other. And we're gonna try to use the turnbuckles, it's a little bright. We're gonna try to use the turnbuckles to tighten it and make sure that the mast is centered on the boat. So that's kind of a delicate thing to do. And then once it's centered, then you can start tightening your rigging around in a pattern so that you're kind of pulling it all in the same direction. Like, you don't want to tighten one way more than the other, because then the mast is going to lean that way. But the first thing is to see if it's actually centered. I'm hoping it still is. It's been probably a year or two, maybe 2 years. Okay, so one of the things to remember whenever you're hoisting something up on your halyard is that you want to have some way to pull it back down. Because if, let's say I hoisted up my tape and the tape broke or something, now my halyard's up at the top of the mast. And so I'm gonna hoist this rope along with it, and we'll hoist them both up right now. So the halyard's at the top. I've got my tape attached to it, and I've got my blue line so that I can pull it all back down by the blue line. Okay, so here I'm measuring to the clevis pin. If I could use my light. I'm measuring to the clevis pin there of my cap shroud. It stopped filming for some reason, but I measured to the clevis pin of the cap shroud, and it was 40 foot 10 inches to the center of that clevis pin. So now we're going to go to the other side. That was the starboard side. We're going to go to the port side and measure that distance and see how similar they are. Hopefully they're similar, and then that would tell us that the mast is centered in the boat. So we are measuring here, and from what I can see, it's 40 foot and 9 inches, right around there. So technically the mast is leaning this way, which is creating that side, the starboard side, to be longer. Because the mast is leaning over, it's taking longer for the tape to get to the bottom. We're just gonna take little 1/2 inch strips. I'm gonna make a few, because we're gonna use the, I'll show you why in a second. Okay, so you take your little strips of tape and you put it on your rigging. This is a marker to indicate where the threads are at the current moment. I like to bend over the end, and it's easy to peel off. But put it right at the bottom there. So as you tighten it, you'll be able to know where you were before. Tighten or loosen, whatever. But that's an indicator of where it is on the threads at this point. Okay, so I've got tape marking where the rigging is on all of them. All 6 shrouds. These are the only ones I'm tuning right now, are these 6. So when you're tuning it, you got to think about, like, you know, for instance, my mast is leaning to port by 1 inch. So think about it this way. If I want it to go to starboard, if I just tighten the starboard side, then the port side shrouds are going to get tighter as I tighten the starboard side shrouds. So it's a game of loosening these and tightening these, you know, loosening the port and tightening the starboard to get the mast to move over, but keeping the tension equal on all 6. It's pretty tough, and there will be some compromises because I'm not a professional, but your tension should be able to stay the same if the mast is technically moving by loosening these ones and tightening those. Then it moved over just a little bit. I am going to loosen these 3 by one complete turn. Then I'll tighten those by 1 complete turn. It's really important to keep track of your turns. So how I do it is, for instance, if I'm gonna move this turnbuckle, I look at this angle of the screwdriver, and when I go around, that is a 1/2 a turn, and then another 1/2 a turn equals 1. So a 1/2 a turn, a 1/2 a turn, and it's 1. But using this angle as my marking point, like a clock. Okay. When you do it, you have to hold this one from twisting, and then twist this guy. And on a turnbuckle, there's a left hand and a right hand thread, so I always just look at the threads to see what's going to happen when I start turning. Okay, so we're going to hold this one. We're going to go around 1/2, 1. Now I don't know if you can see that, but by 1 turn, there's a small gap now between the tape and the turnbuckle, and that shows me that this has gone up, which is loosening. So turning clockwise loosens this. So I'm going to turn the other 2 1 turn clockwise. Okay, with turning it one turn on both sides, I'm at 9.5 inches now. 9.5. Let's see if I can get a little closer. So there you go. When I pull on it pretty tight, it's right about 9.5. I'm not sure if you can see that. So I'm gonna do one more turn on each side, then we'll start checking the tension. Okay, I did one more turn on each side. I didn't make you watch me do that, but let's check it out. So we're right about 10 inches. So there you go. That tells me the mast is centered. All right, well, I messed up. So I didn't take a reading between the two different ones. I was just trying to make this side get to 10. When it was at 9.5, that was probably right because I didn't think about it. If it's pulling away from that side, they're both moving at the same time is what's happening. So when one's getting longer, the other one's getting shorter. So when I thought it had to be to 10, the other side went to 9. So 9.5 is probably even on both sides. So I'm reversing what I just did, putting it back to taking one turn off of it on each side, so that essentially I had tightened this only one and loosened that only one, not twice, once. Let's check it one more time. And we are at 9.5 on the bottom of the clevis pin. Okay, moment of truth. And 9.5 at the top of the clevis pin. So I'm gonna stop there. I feel like that's okay. It's pretty close. 9.5 to the bottom of the clevis pin on that side, 9.5 to the top of the clevis pin on this side. And one thing also to keep in mind is as you're going from side to side, make sure your tape isn't getting twisted and changing your readings by being twisted. So every time you go back, just look up, make sure your tape is straight. Okay, I made a little diagram. This is the boat. There's the bow, the stern, and here we've got the forward port lower. We've got the aft port lower, forward starboard lower, aft starboard lower, and then we've got our port upper and our starboard upper. So I will use this sheet to keep track of my tension. I said this in my last video, but I'll just reiterate a little bit real quick. How this thing works, you put it on like this. You just put the tension in between, like that there. And then you pull this guy over it. Now, the gauge has a reading here. It's reading 15.5, almost to 16. And this is a 3/16. So 15.5 to 16, that's about 14% braking strength, according to this. It's reading 25. So 25 on the 1/4 inch. Pretty low. 5% of the braking strength. This is pretty loose. Here's my other cap shroud. Right about 27. 27 is between 26 and 28 here, and it's saying 7%. So my starboard side, a little bit tighter than my port side. So we gotta adjust those. Okay, after all that, the mast, you know, to my surprise, it stayed pretty center. I measured 49.5 to the lower of the clevis and 49.5 to the upper of the clevis. So there's a slight variation, but I feel like that's really, really close. It's not like my mast is leaning hard to either side. Now, you're not gonna really understand what's going on here, but what I did is I I kept track. So all these 0.5s, if you see them on the paper there, that's a half a turn. So every time I would turn it, I would keep track in case I had to go back. I could basically, it's breadcrumbs, you know, to let me know what I did as I went along. So I kept track of it. So my final on them all is still fairly loose. 17.5 on is only about 10%, no, about 9%. 9% braking strength on the aft lowers. So they're both fairly loose, and but my cap shrouds are at 31, and that translates to here. 31 is right about 8%. 9%, something around there. So that's still fairly loose. Now, you'll see when I'm out sailing that, like for instance, if I'm on a port tack, these lowers will kind of flop in the wind. That freaks a lot of people out, and they would run up and tighten them right there on the spot. I don't want to over tighten my rigging, and it's been good to me so far, so that's how I'm running it. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. One other thing I forgot to mention during this process, and I didn't even do it, but luckily it's not a problem. But one thing you want to do is you need to make sure you don't bend your mast, because if you tighten the lower shrouds right there at the spreaders, let's say you tighten these ones, and then you can pull the upper shroud that way and the lower shrouds that way, and that will put a bend in your mast. So as you're going, and from the start, you wanna take a look right up the center of your mast. Just take a look right up the track and see if there's any sway to it, because if there is some sway to it, that'll tell you that it's tighter on one side than the other, and you want to get that sway out. You want your mast to be straight. Okay guys, thanks for watching. Got one of those projects out of the way, and if I did anything wrong, I'd love to hear what I did wrong or what I could have done better. If I did something that was a little out of sorts, or if you liked it, please let me know in the comments. I'm obviously not a professional rigger, so I'd really like to hear input from people about what I could have done better or something I may have missed. And consult a rigger. You know, I'm not a rigger. Consult a professional rigger, but a lot of these projects you can do yourself, you know, especially like changing your lower shrouds and stuff. You do it right, you can do it. But thanks for watching. Subscribe, like, all that good stuff. All right, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.